author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
As the saying goes, politics is downstream from culture, meaning that what happens in our society is eventually reflected in the quality and type of politicians and politics we end up with. You might say society as a whole gets the politicians it deserves. But what happens when the politicians try to influence the culture, when they become the change agents? Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We have a fantastic show lined up for you today. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news and analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. On today's show, we'll be talking about how the government wants to get in on the Bitcoin and Cryptocurrency Act, how women may soon be eligible for the draft to the front line in any looming conflict, what's the politics behind it, and who's the driving force. We'll also be discussing why flyover country is feeling the burn of an increasingly coastally focused government. And we'll be checking out the latest stories that impact you and your right to freedom. All this and a whole lot more on Liberty Nation Radio. With the prospect of women being eligible for the draft, should the need arise, speculation is in the air as to whether the initial idea of allowing combat roles for females was the first step in this process, and whether those who sought equality in all aspects of life have bitten off more than they can actually chew. To help us dig deeper on this topic, we're joined by Dave Patterson, Liberty Nation author, retired U.S. Air Force pilot, and former Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Controller. Welcome, Dave.
Mark, always good to be with you.
So please, first, give us the background. What does this mean for everyday American women?
Well, I think that this is the first step coming through the Senate Armed Services Committee. And what this means for women is that it's coming closer to being an authorization and put into law that women ages 18 to 31 will also be eligible for the draft. From a practical standpoint, no one's been drafted for a very long time. The last person, I believe, was in 1973. And so from a practical standpoint, I think it's a administrative exercise for women. And but keep in mind that this is not the first time this has been considered. In 2016, a similar provision was passed in the Senate and was never brought to the floor. It was dropped from the National Defense Authorization Act and never came to a floor vote.
So this could be merely a symbolic gesture on the part of politicians, right?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, there are serious people who think that this is an important step in fairness, and it might be also good to note that the same people who believe in this fairness are the same people who will never have to suffer the consequences of these actions.
As is always the case, Dave. Now, I believe that the U.S. operated the draft system from the 50s through the 70s. As you mentioned, you think the last person was 1973. That covered the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Now, if this comes to fruition, would this be the same draft procedure? And in reality, could we see women sent to the front lines if war breaks out?
I think if it came to extremists, that would be the case. But we've had the draft around or something similar since the Revolutionary War. It was invested in the states to muster a militia, and so this has been part of the American landscape for quite some time. Various levels of structure and discipline put into it, but nonetheless, it's been around. This is the first time, however, since 2016, where people have been serious about drafting women.
Okay, I mean, it seems to me that there are historically, from a war point of view, good reasons why it's only ever been what's unfortunately termed disposable men who get drafted. I mean, who would run the country back home? As we saw during the First and Second World War, this was a time when women stepped up and essentially ran the industry of our nations. Who gives birth to the next generation? Have these things even been considered, or are they on the altar or on the chopping block?
I think they have been considered, and I think in somewhat of a perverse way, it's been somewhat of the argument on the side for drafting women that they're equally capable of doing all manner of things as they were in World War II. It's interesting to note that 66% of all the people who fought in World War II were inductees. And it ended up being registered were about 15 million, about 10 million were called up, leaving the home front to be administered by women who did a magnificent job.
True, true. Now, if I were a gambling woman aged between 18 and 31, Dave, I'd be looking at the gambling odds for a conflict under the present political climate. How are my odds looking?
I think your odds of being called up are reasonably good. I mean, the mechanics of it alone would speak to the fact that someone, even today, without any real legislation being passed, the legislation is passed, it'll be a year before anything would ever be manifested in a mechanical, structured way for the Selective Service. And then it would only be in extremis. And today we see wars, and they happen very quickly. And I think that women being called up would be more of a symbol, a gesture that says we are in fact investing our country in this effort.
Yeah, it's not such a question of investing the country there with the act of putting women forward on the front lines of an actual war. That's investing the future of the country, I'd argue.
And I think you're right. I think that it is an aspect of this whole debate that people forget. And that is, they have this image of being drafted. You come into the service, you get your uniform, and life is wonderful. That's not the case. You come in, and they will put you where you are needed. And if that's a frontline combat unit, then congratulations. That's where you're going, whether you're male or female, according to this provision in the NDAA.
So what's the political split on this, Dave? Who's for it and who's against it?
Well, as you might suspect, conservatives are less enthusiastic, and for the most part, they do not support this provision. Democrats do, and you can see the breakout in the SASC, the Senate Armed Services Committee, where you had two Republicans, Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas and Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri, who broke ranks with the minority leader, Senator Inhofe. But you have to remember that this was a $740 billion authorization. And you're not going to stop it. It has a momentum of its own. So the hope is that, once again, it will go to the House, where you have House members who are much closer to their constituency, who will vote it down, or in the case of 2016, never brought it to the floor.
So it's the attached pork that's adding the extra weight that's barreling it towards completion, I would imagine.
Well, it certainly is the attached money and the various constituencies for that money.
Dave Patterson, thank you ever so much.
Mark, always good to be with you. Thank you.
And don't touch that dial. Later in the show, we're going to be looking at how a juggernaut against your liberties is fast approaching. We'll be right back on Liberty Nation Radio after this short break. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Crypto or bust for national governments. It leads the news and business cycle almost daily. Cryptocurrencies. It seems a whole lot of folks are now at least partially invested in these elusive digital currencies. And despite the all-round condemnation of them by world governments, we're seeing leader after leader announce that they'll be starting their own nation's digital version of the currency. So why should a government-backed crypto be any different to one created by some chap in an elaborately computerized basement? Is there a degree of fear-mongering from governments to try and regain control? And at the root level, what on earth are cryptocurrencies? To help us untangle this messy web, we've invited author and economics maven Andrew Moran to help us get to the bottom of the whole mess. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So before we dive closer into the specifics of what's going on, can you give us a background on what a central bank digital currency is and how it'd be different from, say, let's say a Bitcoin or an Ether token or a doggy coin?
No, actually, it's Dogecoin. For years, I always thought it was
I don't believe you.
It is. It's Dogecoin.
It has a picture of a dog, and it's electronic, as in E, dog E, coin. Makes sense. Anyway, moving on.
So a central bank digital currency, or as the hip kids call it, CBDC, is essentially a digital version of the US dollar, the euro, the British pound, or the yuan. It's also centralized and controlled by the state. It functions just like the money in your wallet, except it's digital. Meanwhile, a cryptocurrency is a decentralized currency that operates on a blockchain, or for many people who aren't aware, a blockchain is a public ledger system where all the transactions are publicly listed next to a wallet ID, or some other cryptocurrencies use another type of blockchain system. They're also unregulated by the government, and there are thousands of options to choose from the cryptocurrency market. Last time I checked, I think there were 10,300 of them.
So, Andrew, a growing number of these central banks, they're announcing that they're launching their digital currency. So China just digitized the yuan. The European Union, the UK, and the US have revealed that they're studying the subject closely. Now, why are they suddenly embracing digital currencies? I thought they were bad.
Yeah, what's funny is that back in the day when all these digital currencies were popping up, the governments and central banks were saying, "Oh, this is evil. Oh, you're going to start peddling drugs and you're going to be a terrorist and all that stuff." But the opinions do vary. In China, the official state opinion is that the government wants to facilitate increased cross-border transactions, and they want to increase the yuan's prevalence in international commerce. But as I've written in my book, and I've written on many articles in Liberty Nation and other publication, it's all about control with the central bank digital currency or some other type of state-controlled currency. China has that social credit system, so it's easy to see how a digital yuan would complement such a tyrannical and oppressive system like that. So if you divert from state controls from the entire grid or the system, or you become an opponent of the political party, then you could just be unpersoned from the system. You can be banned from participating in commerce. You can't
unwalleted.
I'm sorry.
Unwalleted.
Hey, yeah, perfect. That's a great phrase. But I don't think this is just privy to China. I think many other countries would have an appetite for this type of control over money and over the population. You already see this in the United States private sector. We have there's a corporate system. Certain payment companies and even banks are canceling specific accounts because they disapprove of the client. Now, this is fine in the private sector because you have your choice, you have competition, freedom of association, yada, yada, yada. But when it comes to government has no business doing this at all. The government should not be banning anybody. The government should not be, prevent you from commerce. So there are many, rabbit holes to crawl through when you have a government-run digital currency.
So, I mean, in terms of safety and control, will punters, when these things come out, will the punters be better off in terms of protecting their assets by buying government-backed crypto, or sticking with the traditional crypto? And will the launch of these things impact those who are already heavily invested in the, let's call it the wild west of digital money?
So just to verify, it's not a government-backed crypto. It's just government, digital currency. It's just like all the money you have in your bank account, except it's just digital, just units. But in Sweden, nearly everything is digital already. So it's challenging to use paper money to pay for something as simple as your bus fare. So you already see real world examples of this. And when it comes to cryptocurrency, the cryptocurrency world is pretty dangerous if you're not careful. There's nothing wrong with buying Bitcoin or Ethereum on an exchange like Coinbase, but there are so many Ponzi scheme coins and joke coins and meme coins and scam coins right now that it's putting a black eye to the cryptocurrency market. So I can see a lot of people saying, oh, well, I don't want to be scammed. I don't want to lose all my money. So I'm going to go into the hands of the government. I'm going to rely on the government to handle this type of system. You see this recently with the Save the Kids token. That was a great example of, a massive scandal involving several social media influencers that cost people a lot of money because there is no regulation of the cryptocurrency market. So a lot of people can just use that as an example by saying, hey, we need regulation. And I will note that Wall Street wants regulation. Wall Street wants Bitcoin, Ethereum, the entire market to be regulated because they think this further legitimizes the crypto market. Because
we'll be coming to regulation soon enough, Andrew. That a lot of criticism has been leveled at cryptos, as you say, for being a payment method of choice for international criminals. Now, I have a couple of questions here. What did that replace? And as we keen students of Die Hard have learned from Hans Gruber, certain bonds are also untraceable. So was it the bonds that they were using before? What's the difference?
Yeah, well, all these criminals, they use the king of cash, the United States dollar. That's been the thing. They've just used different methods. Now, when it comes to crypto, they just use far more intricate methods that I'm aware of. But overall, cryptocurrency is definitely traceable. Combing through the public ledger, keying in a few wallet keys, investing in an IP address, it can definitely find the culprit you're looking for. You saw this with the Colonial Pipeline this past spring. The dark side hackers, they received 90 million, in Bitcoin, but much of it was recouped by the authorities because they went through the proper channels. If it's on the internet, you can be traced. There's no doubt about that. But suffice it to say, Bitcoin and other cryptos, they're not anonymous or untraceable. It might have been in the industry's infancy back, in 2013, which may have attracted these individuals trying to participate in illicit activities. But it's foolish now to believe you can hide behind a digital wallet, especially now it's become so prevalent. All the Wall Street investment firms, they're inside of the cryptocurrency market. So don't think for one second you can get away with committing a crime by using Dogecoin.
Not me, Andrew Moran, not me. So I think a lot of investors, even small money investors, they worry that, as you mentioned earlier about regulation, that as soon as government has a functioning alternative to crypto on the market, that they'll apply a massive regulation, and that will impact not only those that are state founded, but all the others as well. Now, is this the real danger for what many believe would be initially an unshackling from the monetary system?
Yeah, well, I think for the whales, like Wall Street investment firms, they'd welcome this regulation because they think this further legitimizes the entire cryptocurrency market. A lot of these companies they're trying to establish Bitcoin ETFs or Ethereum ETFs and all these other crypto type investments. For the small money investors, I think it would be more damaging because whenever government intervenes, they're going to apply more taxes, more regulations. There's going to be a barrier to entry for probably some people. Now you can just go on a website like Binance or Coinbase, open up an account and buy whatever cryptocurrency you want in however denomination that you wish. Government. See, the thing is that the cryptocurrency, it's a very simple premise. Go to a website, buy your Bitcoin or Dogecoin, and that's it. The government's going to apply all these new layers you have to do, all these security protocols, all these things that take a great premise of crypto and then destroy it. That's the nature of government.
Andrew Moran, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll be back in just a few moments after this short break on Liberty Nation Radio. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio. It will come as little surprise to any of you that despite President Joe Biden's oft-repeated pledge that he'll unite this country, the nation appears more divided than ever before. This could be due to the highly partisan Congress in place, Biden's failures to address just about any issue that conservatives deem important, or it could just be that both sides of the political divide have just plain had enough of each other. We're speaking with Liberty Nation national columnist Sarah Cowgill, who writes one of the most popular and long-running Liberty Nation regulars, The Back 40, where she speaks to Heartlanders week in, week out to figure out just what ails the forgotten folk far from the coasts. Let's see if we can't figure out why the nation seems ripe for splitting. Welcome, Sarah.
Well, it's happy to be here, Mr. Mark.
Now, it seems to me that there's very little common ground between the Back 40 and the Washington, D.C. denizens. What's the driver of this wedge, in your opinion?
Well, it's been that way for quite some time. back when the city folks kind of took over. When we've had so many presidents that are from big coastal areas, not like in the 30s and 40s and 50s where people just kind of, war heroes, generals, that was the norm, and they were from everywhere. We had Texas presidents, from Texas, and to blend in with our coastal elites. But what seems to have happened is there's just a really, looking down the nose at people in the Midwest, or in the, as we call them, the flyover states. Like food doesn't matter, because guess who grows your food, and beef doesn't matter, and where do you think you get your steak? It's not, we're not the Jetsons. You don't just push a button. So I think they believe that we're all undereducated here, and that we grasp onto religion, and we like, to follow rules, but we also like to have guns in our home. And I don't think, that fits in with any ideal progressive left's view of good citizenry.
Was it Barack Obama who said that essentially the flyover folk are clinging to their Bibles and their guns, I believe?
Yes, he did. And, he wasn't popular with us.
So, I mean, is it possible that Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables faux pas that was not so much an untimely slip, but is it perhaps more the prevailing view for those who earn their living from the taxpayer purse?
Yes. In a short answer, yes. It's fun to make fun of us, not, but you'll see what happens when you do. When you finally cross that line that is unacceptable, we vote. Heartlanders will go to the polls. They will speak up. They will put up with nonsense for so long, and then they upend the apple cart. And to be honest, you've got a whole group of people who are kind of tired of being told how stupid they are. They're no more stupid than the left, not understanding how the heck to communicate to people who don't live stacked up on top of each other like Legos. I mean, that's not our thing. We're not city people. We like wide open spaces.
Speaking of implying that people in the flyover states lack mental acuity, we had Vice President Kamala Harris, who recently implied that rural folks either couldn't use or didn't have access to such high-end technology as a photocopier. Now, this seems to smack of the same elitist attitude that toppled Hillary in 2016.
It's very elitist, and it's so wrong on so many levels. I mean, first of all, most farmers, and these are family small farmers, and when I say small farmers, I'm saying 1,000 acres or less of farmland that they run as a family business. Their offices are equipped with every latest gadget. Their combines are driven by computers. We're not out there with a horse and plow anymore. I mean, the level of technology that farmers use today, Kamala Harris wouldn't be able to understand it, even if somebody spelled it out for her. So to put that on us because we can't find a copier machine in the back 40, well, guess what? I know where the Kinko's is in the next town over. I know where the library is. They do copies for you. I mean, it's just ridiculous to keep throwing nasty little barbs at Heartlanders.
Well, here's the thing.
It's not going to do anybody any good.
I figure that when she said something like that, when she said that, she was actually trying to make a case to other East Coast, West Coast elites, because obviously the people in the Heartlands know just very well that they have computer-driven combine harvesters and computer office setups and things like this. So she was really trying to build, it seems, a sort of a buddy-buddy system with other people of her particular privilege to laugh at flyover folks, Heartlanders, in order to get them to support her position on voting. Does that make sense to you?
Makes no sense to me. I mean,
no, I mean my proposition. Does that make sense rather than her point of view?
It's ridiculous to just put this on the backs of Heartlanders. Like, it's fun to make fun of people. That's okay. But it's going to be more fun when you trip and fall down and you don't get back up into the Oval Office ever. That's going to be what's fun for Heartlanders. They don't
it seems
forget.
that Heartlanders are the new Florida man. So speaking
Possibly.
speaking of being divisive, as Kamala Harris certainly has been, and Joe Biden, despite his promises of unity, seems to have driven the divisive wedge even further in. There was a recent Brightline YouGov poll that showed a fair amount of support for, let's call it a balkanized US, split into different regions. Now, although the prospects of this are highly unlikely in our lifetimes, is it something you think that Heartlanders of the future could get behind? And if so, why?
It's interesting. I hear all the time in and around where I go and who I talk to and travel around in the flyover states, the Midwest, out to the Southwest, especially friends in Texas. Texas is like, we're ready anytime. We've got a decent economy and we'll take a few states and we'll secede. And it's all in good fun. And it's really quite a utopian dream if you live anywhere, in the Midwest area, because, we're kind of tired of being overlooked. We're also tired of being treated like we're stupid. And the final, nail in the coffin for any liberal trying to win us over or win over these solid red, will always be red states is the fact that, they can't get rid of us. I think if there was an ability to negotiate the deal, both the left and the right would embrace it. They would absolutely embrace it. They'll carve out their own little red states and their little pocket of blue states and do what they got to do. But I think both sides of the equation at this point would easily jump on board that. They'd figure it out. We'd use the combine computers to figure it out. And, we literally would be open to the discussion. Of course, who's going to pay for the army if nobody wants to do this? That's where we run into trouble. You can't fight the US military. It's funny that you should mention
Texas, because I once had a very dear friend, Bucky Hertner, who I met in the UK, and he was or claimed to be the ambassador consul general for the Republic of Texas to the European Union, which was part of a cessationist movement to make, under the Santa Ana Treaty or something, to make Texas a republic. And due to the numerous bottles of booze we had consumed together, he once anointed me a Knight of Texas. So if there ever is a cessation, I intend to fully claim that title.
Well, move there and become royalty. Heck yeah, we need nobility in Texas, like we need another hole in our heads.
Absolutely. Now, we're about questions and answers here on Liberty Nation Radio. So let me ask you, Sarah, what would bring the disaffected back to the fold?
September 12th, 2001. That's the last time this country was united against anything, and it was a common enemy. Today, the right, the left, the random moderates, everybody's at war with everybody. If you're a moderate, you don't fit with the nut jobs on the right or the nut jobs on the left. If you're trying to be a centrist, we don't have time for you anymore. That's not the way our parties are going. And I don't think, barring an act of God, that there's going to be the Biden unity anytime soon.
Sarah Cowgill, thank you ever so much.
Hey, thanks, Mark.
Now, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this break, and later in the show, looking at the serious infringements to liberty that are on the cards this week. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello, and welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio. We're joined by Mr. Scott D. Cosenza Esquire, Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor and host of the Uprising podcast, to discuss what's happening with your liberties. Welcome, Scott.
Hi, Mark. Thank you.
Great to have you on, as always. And I've got to be asking the first question for today. There's a new Florida bill that could criminalize filming cops on the job. What's the conundrum?
Mark, I don't often bring pending legislation to the table to discuss in this segment, because all manner of state legislators may introduce all manner of legislation that may be nuts or have no chance of passing. This particular legislation is so odious to liberty, though, that I thought we should talk about it. And what it does is it says that if it were to pass, that police officers could essentially ban anyone from recording them within a 30-foot radius. Now,
while they're engaged in their jobs, right?
Exactly right. And so you couldn't even stand across the street from a typical street in the United States of America without violating this law. And we know that police officers hate, generally speaking, being recorded by the public. They have undertaken all manner of effort to prohibit recording by the public, and including up to and including frequently arresting people for doing so, or at the very least lying to them about their right to do so, because of we have to assume that they just hate to be monitored as they go about their job. So
now, Scott, what would be the actual criminal charge here? It certainly couldn't be interfering with an officer whilst in the course of their duty, could it? Because let's say you're 29 feet away, you're hardly an influence.
Right. It actually introduces something I've never heard of before, Mark. And again, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it. Was something called, I think it says unintentional harassment, I think is the way it phrases it, which is, of course, you can't unintentionally harass someone. If you're harassing them, that's an intentional act. It all smacks of just the really the absolute kind of like nails on the chalkboard they have with being closely monitored. We have a situation now where police officers don't often identify themselves. Anybody who wants to verify this can just go on YouTube, and daily almost there are posts made that include police officers refusing to identify themselves by name or badge number. And those things are often printed in fairly small font, if they're at all, on their uniforms, and 30 feet away with a cell phone camera, of course, you can't see these things. Now, that's not to say that there aren't many instances where, especially we've seen with these protests lately, of people getting in a cop's face and prohibiting them from doing their jobs. But 30 feet and in their face there's a wide latitude there. Exactly.
Now, Scott, obviously being a Brit, I don't have a full understanding of the US legal system, but if you're a private citizen, you can film in the UK, you can film anything that's happening on the streets in the UK because you're in public. Now, surely that's the same in the US, right?
Well, that's what our US Constitution says, Mark. If you can see it with your eyes, you can record it. There are some rules about you can't, I recall when Ronald Reagan was president, they used these lenses that were meant to see features of the moon and other planets, and they would stand on a distant hilltop and they could see into his vacation home, and that kind of thing, or the use of scientific instruments that the ordinary person wouldn't have access to, that's not included. But if you can see it on the street, like if you could walk down that street and look at it with your eyes at the police officer, whatever they were doing, then you certainly have the right to record what they're doing. That's part of the First Amendment.
Now, it would behoove to say that never having been in serious trouble with the law myself, if I were to be questioned by a police officer, the first thing I would do is to reach for a video camera, just so I have a record if their body cam happens to be malfunctioned, but I have a record of every interaction, every utterance of speech issued between the two of us. Doesn't that make sense to protect your own liberties, Scott?
Mark, when we see how many police officers are willing to violate their oath and violate the civil rights of the public, knowing that cameras are ubiquitous, it's staggering that people wouldn't want to record the police. Absolutely, the best practice is always, if you can, record your interactions with the police. It's one of the few things that you can do to protect yourself from those violations, or at least hold them accountable afterwards if they do in fact violate your rights or the rights of your neighbors.
Okay, moving on from what's happening with law enforcement in the streets, let's talk about law enforcement within the courts. Now, the Supreme Court approval numbers have hit quite a rough and rocky patch at the moment. First time they're in negative territory since 2017, Scott. What's happened to SCOTUS?
I think it's interesting because In this case, this is the Gallup poll released these numbers, and what it showed was that Democrats and Republicans have a just over 50% favorable rating for the courts. I think it was 51 or maybe 52% tied up for both of those groups. But it was the independents that drug that number way down. The only thing I can think of, Mark, in terms of what might be doing that is the denigration of the court by the people who want to pack the court, namely the progressive Democrats, and especially those on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Sheldon Whitehouse, Mazie Hirono. They've been on this campaign to kind of call the Supreme Court overly political or devoid of value, since the this goes back to the Merrick Garland kind of nomination, and has continued through Coney Barrett's nomination to the court. So
let me just clarify your position here, Scott. So you're saying that because people like Sheldon Whitehouse, Mazie Hirono, because they are speaking publicly about denigrating the Supreme Court, saying that it's become a political tool, that it's become politicized through their own politicization of such a matter, they're actually weakening the public trust in the courts, and that led to this result. Is that about right?
Mark, I think that for the average person, they hear news about different Supreme Court opinions when they're released, and then absent that, the only news they're getting about the court is the denigration of it, and that's certainly going to lead to a lowered opinion of the court, especially for people like independents who maybe don't have a dog in the fight for those opinions. So they're viewing the court as an institution rather than a political body. At least maybe they were before more recent attacks.
What do you reckon to the idea that part of this lower level of popularity is because, as a lot of people have said, the more recent conservative additions to the court haven't been delivering on what many thought they should, even if that were rightly or wrongly thought?
Well, that was wrongly thought, I would say. There's no sort of one-to-one input to output, but we have a Supreme Court term coming up with not all hot button, but big hot button issues. Abortion and gun control, I would say, are the top two, and we have two huge cases that will come up on the next term, and we'll have to see. I think that those nominees will probably pay off, which is to say, I think that Amy Coney Barrett, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh will tend to vote for greater restrictions on the right to have an abortion and greater rights in the firearms area. So
greater
we'll have
protections
to see
of rights in the firearms.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think you're probably spot on there, Scott, and that we'll see another poll further down the line after decisions come out on these two hot button issues specifically, where the Supreme Court is all of a sudden a wonderful, wonderful thing that everybody enjoys, or at least those on the right. What do you say?
Yes, and down on the left. I think the lowest number recorded in recent history was 18% approval by Republicans in the wake of the Obergefell, Obamacare, and gay marriage decisions by the court when Obama was president.
Scott DiCosenza, thanks ever so much.
Thank you, Mark.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio on the Radio America Network. I want to thank our guests, Andrew Moran, Sarah Cowgill, Dave Patterson, and Scott DiCosenza for being part of the show. As ever, I want to thank you most of all, the faithful listener who makes it all worthwhile. You can join same place, same time next week for another special episode where we'll be doing battle with the forces of tyranny, highlighting the hypocrisy in government and the press, and as always, fighting the good fight. I leave you the words of Groucho Marx, who said, "If you're not having fun, you're doing something very wrong." I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Thanks again for being here. Until next time, I wish you the liberty, happiness, and the drive to pursue the fundamentals of your freedom. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.